After 9 years of loving the Alpha King in silence, I finally walked away, and that was the moment he realized what he had lost. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, it is free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic and emotional stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. We love seeing how far these stories travel and knowing who is joining us today. Now, let's begin today's story. The cruelest kind of goodbye is the one no one notices until the silence becomes louder than every word left unsaid. For 9 long years, Serafina Ashmore loved the Alpha King without asking for anything in return. She never expected grand promises, whispered confessions beneath the moon, or a place beside his throne simply because her heart had chosen him. Every morning before sunrise, while the palace still rested beneath a blanket of silver mist, she quietly walked through its endless halls, making certain every detail of King Lucien Everhart's day would unfold without a single inconvenience. His favorite tea always arrived at exactly the right temperature. His study remained organized even after restless nights filled with endless council meetings. The fresh flowers in his chambers were replaced before they could fade, although he had never once asked who remembered to do it. The servants admired her kindness, but assumed she simply enjoyed helping others. The royal advisors barely noticed her presence. Even Lucien himself had come to believe that everything around him simply worked because it always had. The kingdom celebrated the 9th anniversary of Lucien's coronation, with music echoing across marble courtyards, elegant banners dancing in the summer breeze, and thousands of citizens gathering beneath glowing lanterns. Nobles praised the wisdom of their Alpha King. Warriors toasted his courage. Scholars spoke proudly of the prosperity that had blessed the kingdom under his rule. Serafina watched from the edge of the celebration, wearing a graceful ivory dress that blended into the soft moonlight. She smiled whenever someone else smiled. She applauded whenever the crowd applauded. No one realized her smile required more strength than anyone else's laughter. Earlier that afternoon, she had overheard 2 young attendants speaking in hushed voices outside the royal library. One asked whether the king had ever loved anyone. The other laughed gently before answering that a ruler did not have time for such things and certainly would never notice a quiet Omega who spent her days making everyone else's lives easier. Serafina had continued walking as though she had heard nothing at all. Those words did not wound her because they were cruel. They wounded her because they were true. As evening settled over the palace, Lucien stood before his people and thanked the generals who defended the borders, the council that guided the kingdom, the healers who cared for the sick, and every citizen whose loyalty strengthened the realm. His voice carried confidence, gratitude, and genuine respect. The crowd erupted into applause again and again. Serafina applauded with them until her hands grew still. Her name was never spoken. It was not intentional. That was what hurt the most. She had become so constant in his life that he no longer saw her at all. Standing beneath the pale glow of the ancient moon, she finally understood a truth she had spent 9 years avoiding. Love could be patient. Love could be generous. But love should never require someone to disappear in order to prove their devotion. That night, she returned to her modest room inside the palace, folded the few dresses she truly owned, tucked an old silver pendant in her travel bag, and quietly placed her servant's key upon the wooden table. She paused only once before leaving, allowing herself one final look through the window toward the royal tower, where a single light still burned inside Lucien's study. She whispered no farewell because there was no promise left to protect. When the palace gates opened before dawn, Serafina stepped onto the empty road beyond the kingdom, unaware that the ancient moon had already begun watching every step she took, and that her quiet departure would awaken a destiny older than every crown ever forged. The first sunrise outside the palace felt strangely unfamiliar. not because the world had changed, but because Serafina Ashmore was seeing it without the weight of waiting for someone else's tomorrow. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine through the mountain road as she continued walking with only a small travel bag resting against her shoulder. Behind her, the towers of the royal palace slowly disappeared beneath the morning mist until they became nothing more than distant shadows against the horizon. For the first time in nearly a decade, there was nowhere she needed to be before anyone else awakened, no schedule to memorize, no silent responsibility that only she remembered. The freedom felt lighter than air, yet unexpectedly frightening. She had spent so many years defining herself through quiet acts of service that she barely remembered who she had been before loving Lucien Everhart had become the center of her life. Along the forest trail, she encountered an elderly couple struggling to repair the broken wheel of their small wooden wagon. Without hesitation, she set down her belongings and offered her help. Working patiently beside them, she gathered sturdy branches, reinforced the damaged frame, and remained until the wagon rolled smoothly once again. The grateful couple insisted she share breakfast with them beneath a towering oak tree, where warm bread, fresh berries, and sweet honey filled the simple wooden table they carried for their travels. They asked where she was going, and Serafina smiled softly before admitting she truly did not know. The word surprised even her. For years, every destination had been chosen according to the needs of another person. Now every road belonged to her alone. The old woman reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand before saying that sometimes the longest journeys began without a destination because the heart already knew where it needed to arrive. Those words lingered in Serafina's thoughts long after they parted ways. As afternoon sunlight filtered through ancient trees, she reached a quiet riverside village where children laughed while chasing butterflies across open fields. A young girl accidentally dropped a basket of apples into the shallow water, and before anyone else reacted, Serafina stepped carefully into the stream, gathering each apple before it drifted away. The child's bright smile carried a warmth she had not felt in years. The villagers welcomed her with genuine kindness, offering a modest room above a family bakery in exchange for helping prepare bread before dawn. She accepted without mentioning that she had once lived inside the grandest palace in the kingdom. Titles no longer mattered here. People noticed compassion before status. That evening, while golden light faded across the river, several unusually large white wolves appeared at the edge of the forest. They did not growl or threaten anyone. Instead, they stood perfectly still, their silver eyes fixed upon Serafina as though recognizing someone they had been searching for across countless seasons. The villagers whispered that sacred wolves had not visited their valley for generations and considered their appearance a blessing from the ancient moon. Serafina felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading from the old silver pendant resting against her heart. It pulsed only once before becoming still again, leaving her uncertain whether she had imagined it. Far away inside the royal palace, Lucien prepared for another demanding day of council meetings. He reached for his morning tea and paused when it arrived far too hot to drink. His study contained documents arranged in unfamiliar places, and the fresh flowers beside the window had already begun to wilt. These were tiny inconveniences, hardly worthy of notice for a ruler responsible for an entire kingdom. Yet by the end of the morning, a strange emptiness had quietly settled over every corner of his carefully ordered life, an emptiness with a name he still had not spoken aloud. 3 days passed before Lucien Everhart finally spoke the name that had quietly disappeared from every conversation inside the palace. He had ignored the growing feeling that something was missing, convincing himself that exhaustion from endless royal duties had simply clouded his thoughts. Yet every hour seemed to reveal another invisible thread that had once held his daily life together. Reports arrived incomplete because no one remembered the order he preferred during council meetings. His evening schedule became crowded with unnecessary appointments because there was no gentle voice reminding his advisors when he needed time alone. Even the palace gardens looked strangely neglected, not because the gardeners had become careless, but because no one had noticed which flowers always bloomed outside his study window at the beginning of summer. Standing beside the tall windows overlooking the Capitol, Lucian quietly asked the chief steward where Seraphina was. The older man lowered his eyes before answering that she had left before sunrise several mornings earlier. She had not argued with anyone. She had not demanded recognition or offered dramatic farewells. She had simply returned her servant's key, packed her few belongings, and walked away. Lucian remained silent. Surely she would return after taking time to rest. She had always returned before. The thought brought little comfort. Later that afternoon, he entered the palace library searching for a military record, only to discover a folded piece of parchment tucked neatly between two familiar books. It was not a letter. It contained only a carefully written inventory of unfinished tasks that would help the palace continue operating smoothly after her departure. Every instruction reflected the same thoughtful care she had shown for years. There was no bitterness, no accusation, no request. At the very bottom, she had written one final sentence. Some responsibilities should eventually become shared instead of invisible. Lucian stared at those words far longer than he expected. They echoed in his thoughts throughout the evening until they became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Seraphina settled naturally into life beside the quiet riverside village. She rose before dawn to help prepare fresh bread, laughing softly with the baker's family as warm sunlight filled the kitchen with the comforting scent of flour and cinnamon. The work left her hands dusted with flour instead of royal ink, yet she felt an unfamiliar peace growing inside her heart. She spent afternoons teaching children how to identify healing herbs along nearby woodland trails, and evenings listening to elderly villagers tell stories beneath the stars. No one treated her as someone whose worth depended upon endless sacrifice. They thanked her openly. They invited her to sit beside them instead of remaining quietly in the background. Each simple act of appreciation slowly repaired a part of her spirit she had forgotten needed healing. One afternoon, while gathering wildflowers near the edge of the ancient moon forest, Seraphina noticed a magnificent white wolf lying beneath the shade of an ancient cedar tree. Unlike ordinary wolves, its fur shimmered with faint silver light that seemed to blend with the afternoon breeze. One of its front paws had become trapped beneath the roots of a fallen branch. Rather than retreat in fear, Seraphina approached slowly, speaking with the same gentle kindness she offered every frightened creature. The wolf watched her with calm, intelligent eyes and remained perfectly still as she carefully lifted the branch away. The moment the animal stood again, the silver pendant resting against her heart grew warm enough for her to feel through the fabric of her dress. Around them, symbols hidden within weathered stones began glowing softly beneath layers of moss that had concealed them for centuries. High above the forest canopy, shafts of moonlight descended even though the afternoon sun still filled the sky. The great white wolf lowered its head before Seraphina in silent respect, then disappeared soundlessly among the towering trees, leaving behind only glowing paw prints that slowly faded into the earth, as if the ancient moon itself had just acknowledged a destiny that was finally beginning to awaken. When the ancient moon chooses to whisper instead of thunder, only those who listen with their hearts can hear destiny calling. News of the glowing symbols hidden deep within the ancient moon forest traveled quietly from one wandering elder to another, until it finally reached the secluded sanctuary where the oldest guardians of the sacred wolves had watched over forgotten prophecies for generations. Inside a circular chamber carved into living stone, ancient tablets that had remained dark for centuries suddenly shimmered beneath soft silver light. The eldest guardian carefully brushed away layers of dust, revealing words almost erased by time. Alpha King's Luna shall awaken not through desire for a crown, but through the courage to walk away from one. The room fell silent as every guardian exchanged uncertain glances. For generations, they had searched for a woman of extraordinary power, believing she would emerge from royal bloodlines, surrounded by glory and ceremony. None of them had imagined she would appear as a quiet Omega who had simply chosen her own dignity over endless sacrifice. Miles away, Seraphina Ashmore remained completely unaware of the ancient prophecy unfolding around her. Her mornings continued peacefully beside the village bakery, where laughter replaced silence and gratitude replaced expectation. She found joy in ordinary moments, helping children learn to read old storybooks, tending small gardens beside wooden cottages, and sharing evening meals with families who welcomed her as though she had always belonged among them. Every passing day made the burden she had carried inside the palace feel farther away. Yet strange signs continued appearing around her. Wildflowers bloomed unusually early wherever she rested. Injured birds recovered with remarkable speed after she gently cared for them. The white sacred wolves returned again and again, never approaching too closely, but always watching with quiet respect from the edge of the forest. One evening, while following a narrow woodland trail in search of fresh herbs, Seraphina noticed a hidden pathway she had never seen before. Curiosity guided her forward until towering ancient trees opened into a breathtaking clearing unlike any place she had ever imagined. At its center stood an enormous stone arch covered with glowing silver carvings that seemed to pulse gently like a living heartbeat. Moonlight poured through the opening despite the golden afternoon sky above, bathing the entire sanctuary in peaceful radiance. As Seraphina stepped closer, the silver pendant resting around her neck became warm once again. The glowing carvings slowly awakened one after another until the entire arch shimmered with celestial light. Soft voices, ancient and distant, drifted gently through the air, not speaking in commands, but in welcoming whispers that filled her heart with an unexplainable sense of home. She instinctively placed her hand upon the cool stone surface, and the light spread outward across the clearing in graceful waves. Far away inside the royal palace, Lucian Everhart stood before the High Council while advisors discussed border agreements and harvest reports, yet his attention wandered with every passing moment. He realized he had begun searching crowded rooms for someone who was no longer there. At last, he interrupted the meeting with a quiet question that surprised even himself. Had anyone attempted to find Seraphina? An uncomfortable silence answered him before one advisor admitted that no official search had been ordered because everyone assumed she would eventually return. Lucian slowly rose from his chair and looked across the council chamber with calm determination. For the first time, he understood that waiting for her return was no longer enough. If she had spent 9 years quietly walking beside him, then perhaps it was finally his turn to begin the journey toward her, even if he had not yet discovered that the woman he sought had already awakened a destiny capable of changing not only his own future, but the fate of every kingdom beneath the ancient moon. The greatest truths are often hidden behind the quietest choices, and only those willing to let go of what they love can discover what was always meant for them. Seraphina Ashmore stood motionless beneath the ancient stone arch as the silver light slowly faded into thousands of tiny glowing particles that drifted through the peaceful clearing like stars descending from the heavens. The warmth inside the pendant resting against her heart remained, no longer pulsing with uncertainty, but radiating a calm presence that filled her with unexpected peace. She did not understand what had happened or why the forgotten sanctuary had awakened at her touch. Yet for the first time in many years, she felt as though she belonged somewhere without having to earn her place through endless sacrifice. Hidden beyond the clearing, several elderly guardians observed in respectful silence. None of them stepped forward immediately. Ancient tradition required patience whenever the ancient moon revealed its will. Finally, the eldest guardian approached with slow, measured steps, his silver robes moving gently in the evening breeze. He greeted Seraphina not with the formal bow reserved for royalty, but with a gesture even older than the kingdoms themselves, placing one hand over his heart before lowering his head. Confused, Seraphina returned the greeting politely and apologized if she had entered a sacred place without permission. The old guardian smiled kindly and assured her that no one entered this sanctuary by accident. He explained that for centuries the gateway had remained dormant, refusing every ruler, every warrior, and every ambitious soul who sought its power. Yet it had awakened willingly the moment she arrived. The words left Serafina speechless. She quietly insisted there must be some mistake because she was only an ordinary Omega who had spent most of her life serving others inside a royal palace. The guardian gently shook his head. Ordinary people, he explained, rarely transformed the hearts of everyone around them through kindness alone. He invited her to walk deeper into the sanctuary, where a circular chamber surrounded a crystal pool reflecting the moonlit sky, even though night had not yet fallen. Ancient carvings covered the walls, telling stories of forgotten generations and the rare women known only as Alpha Kings Luna. They were never chosen because they desired power. They were recognized because they inspired wisdom, restored hope, and reminded great leaders that true strength existed to protect rather than command. As Serafina listened, fragments of her own life suddenly seemed connected by invisible threads. Every act of quiet compassion, every moment she had placed another person's well-being before her own, every difficult choice made without expecting recognition had shaped something far greater than she had ever imagined. The Guardian revealed one final truth that caused her heart to tremble with emotion. The ancient moon never awakened Alpha King's Luna, while she remained trapped in silent devotion, because the sacred blessing could only appear after she chose herself with courage and dignity. At nearly the same moment, Lucian Everhart departed the palace for the first time in many months without an escort of ceremonial banners or royal celebration. He traveled with only a handful of trusted companions, determined not as a king seeking to reclaim someone who had left, but as a man searching for the person whose quiet presence had guided his life for longer than he had ever understood. Along the road, he stopped in villages where people spoke warmly of a kind young woman with golden hair who helped strangers before introducing herself. Every story sounded remarkably alike. She repaired what was broken, encouraged those who had lost hope, and departed before anyone could reward her generosity. Listening to those voices, Lucian slowly realized that the kindness he had once believed belonged only to the palace had never belonged to the palace at all. It had always belonged to Serafina, and wherever she chose to walk, light seemed to follow. Some journeys begin with searching for another person, but the most important ones begin when someone finally becomes worthy of being found. Lucian Everhart traveled farther from his kingdom than he ever had before, leaving behind royal ceremony and familiar comforts in exchange for dusty roads, quiet villages, and honest conversations with ordinary people whose lives had been quietly touched by Serafina Ashmore. Everywhere he stopped, he heard the same stories told with different faces and different voices. A lonely widow whose roof had been repaired before the autumn rain arrived. A frightened child who had learned to read because a kind traveler patiently sat beneath an old maple tree every afternoon. An exhausted farmer whose harvest had been saved because a stranger refused to leave until every basket had been carried into the barn before the storm. None of them knew they were describing the woman who had spent 9 years unnoticed inside a royal palace. None of them asked for her family name or her former title. They simply remembered how she had made them feel seen. Each story settled heavily inside Lucian's heart, revealing a truth he could no longer deny. He had admired courage on battlefields and wisdom inside council chambers. Yet he had overlooked the quiet strength that transformed lives without asking for recognition. Meanwhile, within the ancient moon sanctuary, Serafina continued learning from the elderly guardians who had devoted their lives to preserving forgotten traditions. They never treated her as someone chosen because of destiny alone. Instead, they encouraged her to understand that every sacred gift required humility, patience, and compassion. She spent her mornings helping tend crystal gardens nourished by streams of silver water, and her afternoons studying ancient records describing the women remembered as Alpha Kings Luna. To her surprise, the stories were not filled with conquest or extraordinary displays of power. They spoke of peacemakers who united divided kingdoms, healers who restored hope during difficult seasons, and leaders who reminded powerful rulers that authority existed to serve rather than to be served. The more Seraphina learned, the more she understood that the blessing awakening within her was not changing who she was. It was revealing who she had always been beneath years of quiet sacrifice. One peaceful evening, while moonlight reflected across the crystal pool at the heart of the sanctuary, the eldest guardian invited Seraphina to stand before the ancient waters. As she looked into their perfectly still surface, she did not see a queen wearing a crown or a legendary figure surrounded by glory. She saw herself smiling with genuine peace for the very first time in many years. The guardian gently explained that the greatest sign of the ancient moon's blessing was not light or prophecy, but the restoration of a heart that no longer depended upon another person's approval to know its own worth. At that very moment, Lucian reached the quiet riverside village where Seraphina had first begun rebuilding her life. The baker warmly welcomed the weary traveler, never realizing he was speaking with the Alpha King himself. Over freshly baked bread and warm cider, he described a young woman whose kindness had changed the entire community in only a few short weeks. When Lucian quietly asked where she had gone, the baker smiled and pointed toward the distant mountains where the ancient moon forest touched the horizon. She said she finally felt as though she was walking toward home. The baker recalled with quiet admiration. Those simple words remained with Lucian long after he resumed his journey beneath the evening sky. He realized that if he truly wished to stand beside Seraphina again, he could not ask her to return to the life she had left behind. Instead, he would have to become the kind of man who deserved to walk beside the future she had chosen for herself, even if that future no longer included him. True destiny does not reveal itself by taking away a person's freedom. It reveals itself by giving them the courage to choose with an open heart. As Lucian Everhart continued his journey toward the ancient moon forest, every step seemed to carry him farther away from the proud king he had once believed himself to be. The winding mountain roads offered long hours of quiet reflection, and for the first time in many years there were no council meetings, royal ceremonies, or military reports waiting to distract him from his own thoughts. He remembered countless evenings when Seraphina Ashmore had quietly placed a warm cup of tea beside his desk before disappearing without expecting gratitude. He remembered difficult winters when she had somehow anticipated every challenge before he had even spoken about it. He remembered how naturally he had accepted her presence, never questioning why peace always seemed to follow wherever she happened to be. Only now did he understand that peace had never belonged to the palace itself. It had followed her heart. Deep within the ancient moon sanctuary, Seraphina's days unfolded with a gentle rhythm that gradually restored every part of her spirit. The guardians continued teaching her the forgotten history of Alpha King's Luna, explaining that every generation remembered the blessing differently because it always reflected the character of the woman chosen to carry it. Some had become wise advisors who prevented wars before they began. Others had restored trust between rival kingdoms through compassion instead of fear. None had ruled through force. Every one of them had strengthened others simply by reminding them of their better nature. Seraphina listened carefully, humbled by every story, never believing herself worthy of comparison. The eldest guardian smiled whenever she expressed such doubts, reminding her that humility was one of the rarest gifts the ancient moon ever recognized. That evening, the sacred wolves gathered peacefully around the crystal clearing once more. Instead of remaining at the edge of the forest, they slowly approached until they formed a wide circle around Seraphina. The great white wolf she had rescued days earlier stepped forward first before gently lowering its head. One by one, the others followed, not in submission to power, but in quiet recognition of the harmony growing within her heart. At that very moment, the crystal pool reflected not only the moon above, but countless silver stars that had not yet appeared in the evening sky. The ancient carvings surrounding the sanctuary glowed with renewed brilliance, and the guardians watched in reverent silence as the forgotten blessing continued awakening without fear or spectacle. Far below the mountains, Lucian finally reached the border of the ancient moon forest. An elderly traveler resting beside a clear spring noticed the royal crest upon his cloak, but greeted him without ceremony. The old man asked only one simple question. Had the king come searching for someone he had lost, or had he come searching for the person he hoped to become? Lucian remained quiet for several moments before answering honestly that he believed the two journeys had become the same. The traveler smiled gently and pointed toward a narrow woodland path illuminated by shafts of silver light filtering through the ancient trees. Few people ever found that path unless their intentions were sincere, he explained. As Lucian continued forward, the forest itself seemed strangely welcoming. Birds sang from unseen branches, cool breezes carried the fragrance of wildflowers through the towering pines, and distant white wolves watched calmly without fear or hostility. Unknown to both of them, only a few miles now separated Lucian and Seraphina. Yet the greatest distance remaining between them was no longer measured by roads or mountains. It would be measured by whether a heart that had finally learned its own worth could freely choose to trust again, and whether a man who had once overlooked quiet devotion had truly become worthy of receiving it. The strongest apology is not spoken with perfect words. It is lived through quiet choices that ask for nothing in return. As Lucian Everhart followed the silver-lit trail deeper into the ancient moon forest, the air gradually filled with a peaceful stillness unlike anything he had ever experienced inside the palace. Every towering tree seemed older than memory itself, and every gentle breeze carried the faint fragrance of blooming moon lilies. At the end of the winding path, the forest opened into a magnificent sanctuary where crystal waters reflected the evening sky with impossible clarity. Lucian stopped without taking another step. Across the shimmering pool stood Seraphina Ashmore, her long golden hair moving softly with the breeze as she listened to the eldest guardian explain another ancient inscription carved into the surrounding stone. She looked peaceful, confident, and completely different from the quiet young woman who had once hidden her own feelings behind endless acts of service. She no longer appeared as someone waiting to be noticed. She looked like someone who had finally discovered her own place in the world. The guardian quietly turned toward Lucian before offering a respectful nod, then slowly stepped away with the other elders, leaving the sanctuary wrapped in gentle silence. Neither of them spoke immediately. For several long moments, they simply looked at one another while the crystal water reflected the moonlight between them. Lucian finally broke the silence with a voice softer than Seraphina had ever heard from him. He admitted that he had spent many days believing he had come to ask her to return, but every mile of the journey had taught him a different lesson. He realized he had never truly understood the countless ways she had strengthened his life or the kingdom itself. He confessed that he had mistaken her constant kindness for something that would always remain, never recognizing that every thoughtful gesture had been a gift freely given rather than an obligation. Seraphina listened quietly without interrupting. There was no anger left in her heart, yet there was also no desire to return to the woman she had once been. When Lucian finished speaking, she thanked him sincerely for his honesty before gently explaining that forgiveness and returning were not always the same decision. She told him she had finally learned that loving someone should never require forgetting herself. During the years she had spent beside him, she had measured her worth through his happiness. Here, beneath the ancient moon, she had learned to measure it through kindness freely shared, purpose freely chosen, and peace that did not depend upon another person's attention. Lucian lowered his eyes, accepting every word without argument. Instead of asking again, he simply said that whether or not she ever chose to walk beside him in the future, he would spend the rest of his life becoming a better king because she had shown him what true leadership looked like. The crystal pool suddenly shimmered as soft silver light spread across its surface. The sacred wolves quietly emerged from the surrounding forest, sitting peacefully around the sanctuary with calm eyes fixed upon the pair. The eldest guardian smiled gently as the ancient carvings along the stone walls glowed brighter than ever before. The blessing of Alpha King's Luna had never been about binding two hearts through destiny alone. It had always existed to reveal whether love could survive only after both hearts had learned wisdom, humility, and freedom. Serafina looked toward the moonlit sky before returning her gaze to Lucian. She offered him a warm smile filled with compassion rather than certainty. It was not the promise of a restored romance, nor was it a farewell. It was something far more meaningful. It was the first moment in their lives when every choice that followed would belong equally to them both, freely given beneath the silent blessing of the ancient moon. 1 year later, the ancient moon shone brighter than anyone could remember, not because the heavens had changed, but because the hearts beneath them finally had. The Kingdom of Silver Crest welcomed the annual festival of the ancient moon, with music drifting through every street, children laughing beneath glowing lanterns, and families gathering in gardens filled with silver blossoms. Visitors from neighboring villages arrived not to witness displays of royal power, but to celebrate a new era defined by compassion, wisdom, and unity. King Lucian Everheart had quietly transformed the kingdom over the past year, fulfilling every promise he had made without expecting recognition. He established councils where every voice, regardless of rank, could be heard. Palace servants received the same respect as noble families. He spent time walking among ordinary citizens without ceremony, listening before speaking and learning before deciding. Those closest to him noticed that he no longer asked whether every task had been completed. Instead, he asked whether the people responsible for those tasks had been cared for. His kingdom flourished because kindness had become part of its foundation rather than an occasional gesture. Meanwhile, Serafina Ashmore remained within the ancient moon sanctuary, traveling often between the sacred forest and nearby villages where her quiet presence continued bringing comfort wherever she went. She never accepted titles beyond those freely given by grateful hearts. Yet stories of Alpha King's Luna spread naturally across distant lands. Parents told their children about the gentle woman whose greatest strength was reminding powerful people that true leadership began with humility. Travelers spoke of sacred wolves peacefully walking beside her through moonlit forests. Elders smiled whenever they heard those stories, knowing that legends became timeless only when they inspired others to become better themselves. During the festival, the guardians of the ancient moon invited both Serafina and Lucian to return to the crystal sanctuary where their journeys had crossed 1 year earlier. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. The same crystal pool reflected the evening sky, the same ancient carvings shimmered beneath silver light, and the same white sacred wolves quietly surrounded the clearing with calm, watchful eyes. This time there were no unanswered questions between them. Lucian stepped forward with quiet confidence, carrying no royal scepter and wearing no ceremonial crown. He had intentionally left every symbol of authority behind because he wanted to stand before Serafina only as himself. Looking into her eyes, he spoke gently. He thanked her not only for loving him during the years when he had failed to notice, but also for finding the courage to leave when staying would have meant losing herself. He admitted that her departure had become the greatest lesson of his life because it taught him that love could never be earned through expectation, only through respect renewed each day. Serafina smiled with peaceful warmth as she listened. She saw not the distant king she had once admired from afar, but a man who had chosen growth over pride and responsibility over comfort. Without hesitation, she reached out and gently took his hand. The crystal pool answered with soft ripples of silver light that spread across the sanctuary like moonlight dancing upon calm water. The sacred wolves lowered their heads together, while thousands of tiny lights drifted upward through the ancient trees toward the night sky. No prophecy commanded the moment. No invisible bond forced the choice. It belonged entirely to two people who had learned that love was never proven by silent sacrifice alone, nor by words spoken too late, but by the daily decision to honor another person's dignity while protecting their own. From that night forward, the legend of Alpha King's Luna became more than an ancient blessing. It became a reminder passed from one generation to the next that the strongest hearts are not those that never break, but those that heal without losing their kindness. And that the greatest love story is not about finding someone who completes you, but about two whole hearts choosing freely in every single day to walk the same path beneath the everlasting light of the ancient moon.